Everybody make sure you sign the sign-in sheet if you haven't already, get it before you leave, please.
That's, not every day you get to introduce somebody who doesn't need an introduction. But, if you remembered, Evelyn Robertson, who came, back last year, Steve wanted to be in touch with him. I heard him on the radio one morning, I was like, I'll have to find this guy. Steve hit me for that. And I knew that he had done a lot of history. I could tell by just listening to him for all these years that he was a history buff and was interested in things like that. You know, the only downfall is he's from Alabama. But I can't say anything because I have about 10 generations around Florence and all of it. But he's going to give us a presentation about the utility history here in Jackson, Tennessee. And it's all yours.
All right, thank you very much. They were asking about genealogy. I told the story. Benny Denton, the Latter-day Saints, was on one day. They'd done the Freedom Bank records, and I was talking to an elder of the church in Atlanta, I think it was. Benny set it up. He said, if you give me the name of your grandfather, what county he was born or died in Alabama, he said, I'll in the 4-minute commercial break we got coming, I'll try to find out what I can. So he came back after 4 minutes, sat down, and he said, well, I got good news and bad news. He said, I've got part of your family, the Obermeyers, traced to Germany in the 1600s. Pretty impressive. He said, the bad news is you're a damn Yankee. And he said, did you know your the Bowers that they traced furthest back was Ellis Bowers. He was born in Suffolk, New York. I said, well, I didn't want to hear that. He moved from there to New Jersey and on to Pennsylvania, so it didn't get any better. There's an excellent book on utility history. It's called Here For You that Mary Reed did. I think this is in the Tennessee room. And it's an excellent, you know, I know a lot of the work that y'all do is related to names and specific people that contributed to all this, but it's an excellent overview. It was written a few years ago, but it excellent covered the history of utilities in Jackson and also the transitions that utility companies made in those years when they started becoming established. When you get into utility history, it's the lifestyles, the economic engines, the changes in communities, but it's also this continued battle between what should be public and what should be private in this country. And we still have that discussion today. And it's been interesting, the evolution of this. One of the key cases that went to the Supreme Court had to do with a bridge going into Boston. And you know, if you're an entrepreneur and you build a bridge, how many bridges do you want going into Boston? Yours. It was very successful because they charged a toll. And it got to where people were buying stock in the bridge because traffic kept going up and more money was coming in. And so, you know, they paid for the bridge and then started selling interest in the bridge and all that stuff. And finally some of the merchants in Boston said, well, we need another bridge. Well, private entrepreneur's not gonna do it, they already got one, all right? They already got one. So the court finally decided that there was a legitimate interest on the part of the citizens of Boston in having more, and so it opens up, you know, and of course the people that have built a private bridge don't want the government to get in the bridge building business, because the government can get unlimited resources and build as many as they feel like they need. And so it's that continued battle out there. We're having a discussion right now in Tennessee as to who's gonna finance the roads. Is it gonna be totally state government, or are we gonna go into private enterprise to build additional lanes, you know? So that discussion continues. It's all a part of it. And so utility history, you know, you see it evolve now through the years, and it becomes a really interesting dynamic. It's a different way of looking at what happens to us, different way of looking at our town and our history. This was life in Tennessee. These photos came from the TVA, and when the TVA started, after that, you can tell from the automobile, the TVA starts in 1933. We'll get to that in a minute, but it's just a reminder. When I do presentations to people that are young, like students at Union, it's kind of tough because they're 20. You know, and so you mentioned 9/11, well, they don't know anything about that unless they've studied it, because it's not anything they remember. They were born after that. You know, they're 20 years old now, well, they were born in 2003. They missed that by a couple of years. And so people that are voting now that are 18, you know, you say something about Bill Clinton or whatever, they don't know anything about that, but that's history, unless they've studied it. So we're not even gonna get to Watergate, Richard Nixon, or the Kennedy assassination, or any things that we remember. You know, Vietnam War and all that stuff, they gotta go to history books. And so it's how quickly things change and how their perception of things change. So when you put a photo like this up, which is, you know, people that raised me, you know, fit right into this. But younger people don't know anything about this, have no comprehension of what's going on here. And so that's life in Tennessee. Bob Hayes, one time when I was interviewing him out at the Ag Center, he said the Ag Center was built in the early part of the 20th century. And so it's over 100 years old now. And he said until 1950, he said you didn't farm to make money. And some people did, had large landholdings, whatever, sharecroppers that would go. But he said people farmed to survive. That's why they had the home ec clubs and everything else that still continue in an echo through the ag service here, because you try to show a family how to survive off the land and the food, and don't throw anything from a hog away, right? A root or the tutor or whatever, mincemeat pie and everything else, because you take a face meat and do something with it, put some berries around it, we're gonna make that edible. And so it's just a reminder of how quickly life has changed, and utilities have helped drive that, and the change in the lifestyle that we got. How do I get this to move up or down? And I do a page advance.
You do a arrow down.
Arrow down. I get, it's like a little thing.
Uh-huh.
Right there. I'll let it sit too long, I'll move on. There we go. Well, here's the driving force in the utility history of Jackson, Tennessee. You know, you think it'd be, you know, health and all that other stuff. Sewage system is going to be the toughest thing to sell. It's going to be the last thing we develop. From a health sense, you think, man, we need to have a sewage system, right? You know, but what drove the utility development in history of Jackson, Tennessee, is light. People wanted light, and that's what started all this. We got a gap of 50 years in Jackson, Tennessee, between November 7th and 1821, when we passed the act creating Madison County and constituted in December of 1821. And the Citizens Gas Light Company went into operation in 1871, offering manufactured gas to Jackson's business core. That was 1871. 50 years after the creation of Madison County, and 49 years after the existence creation of Jackson, which became the county seat. And one thing you notice on this, our original settlers came into Cotton Grove East, Spring Creek out in the northeast, and Alexandria out west Forking here. Now, folks out of Denmark have found some gravestones out in that area that date like 1813, 1814. So there were people here before this area even opened for settlement. They came here in advance, traders and trappers and whatever. They set up communities. But these are the three after we get the treaty in 1818, and Jackson becomes the county seat. It's kind of the central point between these settlements. And what were they out there to get? Water. They had to have water. So you come in by water with the flatboats. That becomes the mechanism of travel. And then people settle where they can get water. My dad told the story that he was very angry most of his life with my grandmother because she had 10 children that lived to be adults. He said he was always one she sent to get the water, which is a big task for a kid. And you got to go to the creek, it's heavy, bring it in, all this stuff, go back. And so finally, he's about 40 years old. He finally asked her, how come you made me go get the water all the time? He said, well, son, I hadn't thought about it. She said, I think it's because I could depend on it. The older brother would run off and go play, and everything else, I could always count on him. So finally at 40, he and his mother had to make it up, but she didn't know it was a problem. But people had to have water, and that dictated where they settled. But it also means that Jackson as a city, and this is off the Harper's magazine, you've seen this, courthouse, all this stuff, the sketches from Jackson, Tennessee, when the Union Army moved in, occupied here in June 1862. But we go through all the way through the Civil War without utility service. People that make movies put all the concentration on making sure the uniforms are right, or the cars are vintage, or the costuming is right. People that lived in those days are totally different people. Their attitudes, their concept of the world, concept of each other is totally different. And they live totally different. So we got a city that's got, what, 12,000 union forces here? They got no collective utilities. So that means whatever you do to light an area, to cook, to heat, to get access to water, to dispose of human waste, has to be done individually. There's no collective system to do any of that. And so that's a totally different way of life. And it continues in Jackson until 1871, when we get a gas system. So when we look at these old photos, those are two of the Madison County courthouses that precede the one we got now. It's just a reflection that all that is done, just like this when we look at Jackson, Tennessee in the 1870s. In the 1870s, we got multi-story buildings. We have no collective utility service. So if I need to relieve myself, I gotta have a chamber pot. Somebody's gotta do something with that. Where does it go? Well, it depends on the folks. Some of them just go right out the window, right? They go in the street. They go wherever. But that happens every day. You think about the Civil War, you got 12,000 federal troops here. They got horses and everything else. And so so if you dropped us back there, if there were such a thing as a time machine and we could go back, we probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes. It'd be like, excuse me, where's the water fountain? Right? Where's the bathroom? Right? Well, where's the electric light? Where's the light? What are we gonna do to get light? And so it's just that important reminder. So that's where we are in the 1870s. We don't have anything yet. 1871, the gas is gonna come. And the gas is gonna come for what reason? Lights, street lights. Now, people wanted light. We don't have a water system yet. We don't have a sewage system. We don't have electricity yet. Right? People wanted lights. They got chamber pots in the house. Right? We said, man, y'all need a flush toilet here. No, they wanted light. And so the Citizens Light Gas Company was formed, went into operation in 1871. There's an echo of that here today because this is the first location. If you see on this photo here, this is the back of the farmer's market offices. Okay? You see this archway here, those livery stable type archways, that's the mural in the back. That old brick is part of the original gas company here. And the area out there where the amp has been formed, that slope coming down that hill was the original area where they stored the coal or the coke that they fired up the gas with. So when you're at the amp, you're at the original utility location in Jackson, Tennessee, where the office was. And part of that brick is still there. It reminds me of those bricks. The building between what was Nando Jones and the Hayes Fish Market, there was that small building there that had those ovals. You see them every once in a while in town. And so you had to have places for horses and everything else. And so the gas system worked off this basis. Citizen Light Gas Company would have coal that was coming on the railroad, and that's going down toward the brewery now. So we still got that echo of the old railroad tracks here. They would bring coal or coke in, and they would store it there, and they would burn it, and capture that gas in tanks, above ground tanks, and get it pressurized, and they would feed it out through the wood pipes. And that's one of the wood pipes from the Jackson Utilities history right there. And here are a couple different angle ones. That's one on the left with a hole. And then there were smaller pipes. This one's actually put together with clamps. They take sections of wood, put together, clamp it, and see. The other is just hollowed out. And of course the gas would start coating it and would kind of seal it on the inside. So they became a pretty effective mechanism. Couple of things, no backhoes. Right? You gotta dig that pipe, you gotta dig the ditch, lay that pipe, by hand. So that's where it starts in 1871, because we wanted light. So the Citizens Gas Light Company, that becomes important in the utility history of Jackson, Tennessee, because those are the guys that are gonna do this. They're gonna bring the electric light. And that's gonna change things forever. The gas system to this day regrets that they ever did that. If you know anything about the gas system, those guys compete with electric guys. And say, well, it was y'all's fault. So what did it mean? That company was in what business? Citizen Gas Light. They were in the light business. When they found a better way to get light, the electricity, they brought it. So here we go. What it's gonna lead to is a total revolution of life in Jackson, Tennessee. But this is not gonna happen easily. See if I can read this. This is from the Whig, the newspaper, in the Citizen Light Gas Company. I want to read off this. I had good intentions there between my eyesight. That not being as large as I thought it was. This is the report on when the electric light came to Jackson, Tennessee. Right down here, it's 7:30. This is on December the 21st, 1887. It's 7:30 o'clock. The engine started. The large wheels revolved, which caused the dynamo to generate the electric current. Okay? And so the lights come on down here, and it says the new lights were greeted with, what is it? Applause by the crowd. They got excited because they had electric light. And so it produced a round of applause. And it's very, very interesting. It had 25 street lights downtown Jackson. Here's a list of the folks that had those. With the 25 lights for the city, the full capacity of the dynamo and the other subscribers come in, the company will have to, they'll order a second dynamo because they're gonna have more, right? They thought that these lights are gonna cost $100 per year, $10 if you pay it by the month. And they had them for everybody except the post office. And it says that the post office didn't get their light because the paperwork was tied up in Washington. So they had 24 in the post office, and then, of course, the wind was blowing. The wind was blowing, and all that happened out there. And so they were going to get globes full of lights, and they said the post office might have to wait. They finally got their globes out there. I guess I can do it off this. And so that was the beginning of the electric light. That was from the Whig in 1887. Well, I want to go through this part here because we're going to go back up and pick up water and sewage, which also happened in the 1800s. But it's a different story. The Citizen Gas Light Company brings the electricity to downtown Jackson. And when they brought gas, this is generated gas, not natural gas. That's coming in the early part of the next century. When they got the gas out there, and gas has got its own issue. Now, I'll do that and get back on the electric guys here. But in 1821, in Fredonia, New York, William H. Hart drilled a 27-foot deep well in an effort to get a large flow of gas from a seepage of natural gas. This was the first well intentionally drained to obtain natural gas. This is 1821. We're not even here yet as far as our city. We don't start until 1822. For most of the 1800s, natural gas was used almost exclusively as a fuel for lamps. Because there were no pipelines to bring gas into individual homes, most of the gas went to street lamps. After the 1890s, however, many cities began converting their street lamps to electricity, and gas producers began looking for new markets for their product. In 1885, Robert Bunsen invented a burner, Bunsen burner, right? That mixed air with natural gas. The Bunsen burner showed how gas could be used to provide heat for cooking and warming buildings. And in 1891, the construction of pipelines to bring gas to new markets was introduced. One of the first lengthy properties was built in 1891, 120 miles long, to carry gas from the fields of central Indiana to Chicago. There were very few pipelines built until after World War II in the 1940s. But when they did this article, they said, of course, there's enough pipe network now in the country, laying end to end with stretch to the moon and back for natural gas. But it shows the entrepreneurs get involved, right? You got gas out there, so what we do? We got it for street lights, well, let's get it in the house. So we'll come up with gas meters. people start lighting their homes with gas created to get off the street, get into the house, which takes some work. But people wanted it, because they wanted light. That way I don't have to have candles. I don't have a coal oil lamp. I can just turn it on, turn it off, and they'll feed the gas until a certain time of night, 10 o'clock, so they'll cut it off. But at least I've got lighting. So you see, the desire for light is what drives things. Well, that brings electricity down, because electricity becomes a preferable way of doing those street lights downtown. So the Citizens Gas Light Company in 1887 brings the electric light to Jackson, Tennessee, and that changes things, because electricity takes off. We go through all that evolution, AC and DC current, all this stuff with Edison, and a lot of things going on. Once it's settled, it takes off. And so the next step in Jackson's history is the Jackson Railway and Light Company. And the reason was, of course, is the electricity becomes the source of the power for the trolley cars. And so the railway system inside Jackson, Tennessee runs off of electricity. So it becomes the Railway and Light Company. The Jackson Railway and Light Company was, became the key in the transit. The actual transportation, city transit system started with the Jackson Subscriber Street Railroad in 1887. But the Jackson Railway and Light Company is going to take all that over in 1906. It'll last until 1928, when it's replaced by West Tennessee Power and Light. What starts happening with electricity is it starts being defined. The Citizens Gas Light Company is going to bring electricity because what? They're in the light business. They're in the light business, not in the gas. They're in the light business. Okay. But once electricity gets here, it's got a power of its own. And the Jackson Railway and Light Company is prepared, it says, to furnish electricity for lighting purposes and for power. And they're prepared to supply electricity for lighting purposes and for power, and they're going to get inside the house as well. And so the big fight is going to be on. The Jackson Railway and Light Company, that photo is from 1918. Well, the next step in all this becomes West Tennessee Power and Light. That's a shot of Bemis on the right, before the trees grew, after they cleared away. But Bemis is a progressive place at that time, because they got alleys, they store coal, all these things. People got access to water, and so it's a whole different life in Bemis. If you're in Bemis, you were uptown in 1906. Uptown in 1906. But you see the West Tennessee Power and Light. West Tennessee Power and Light becomes the utility that grows as we get natural gas access out of Memphis. In the 1920s, they start spreading markets. They become a part of a national. West Tennessee Power and Light is part of National Power and Light. It's an extension. It sounds like it's West Tennessee, but it's not. It's not owned here. The big guys got involved in the business, and they're the ones that started spreading utility service. They combined gas, electricity, the railways within communities. They had trolley cars big enough like Jack. They had trolley cars. And so they became the behemoth here. They're put together in the early 1920s, okay? And they're taking everything over. This is nationwide stuff here. All right. A couple things gonna happen. 1929, Wall Street, whatever. And then nobody saw this coming. I don't think it was gonna like this. It's gonna be. Of course, it's a big progress time in Jackson. We had the boiler works, is in a rail yard. We had some big things going on here in the late 1800s. We're facilitating this. We're on the way to the TVA. These are private companies. They're doing this business. First of all, they're hometown companies at first. Now, Citizen Gas Light is doing the gas. Jackson, Tennessee is going to do the water and go to the sewage system. That's a separate story. I'll get back to that in a moment. But then electricity becomes these are private enterprise individuals. They're doing this. But what happens with private enterprise? Well, private enterprise is going to go where? Where it's profitable. Can't make money. We may love you, but we ain't coming to Decatur County. We're not going to Cedar Grove. Right? Why? Well, nobody's using electricity much. and it costs money to run a wire to get out there. We can't afford it, not gonna do it, it's not a problem. And so, we're about to take a big step. There's also this reminder. When you get to the 1920s and 1930s, if you live in Jackson, you've got access to utilities. If you live outside Jackson, Tennessee, unless you're generating yourself, you don't have any, right? So people don't have it, they don't use it, don't know anything about it. And that's just a reminder, this is the valley before the TVA. Because a lot of Tennesseans live outside the city. So the growing demand for electricity is gonna change everything. In 1933, President Roosevelt is gonna sign the act creating the TVA. We'll have a three-member board, which it will retain through most of its history. That changed just recently. And they will run the TVA. The challenge with the TVA, of course, is ways to generate the electricity. Henry Ford was working on a plant down at the Shoals in Alabama. The big fight became, do we want private entrepreneurs or do we want the government? Senator Norris out of Nebraska, who's on the right, there behind the president. As we look at it, he's to the president's left or her right. Starts pushing rural electrification and the concept that electricity should be provided for everybody. It was going to mean that much as far as life goes, and it's going to change all the dynamics of electricity, particularly in Tennessee Valley. But President Roosevelt looked at Canada. In Canada, electricity was more utilized and it was cheaper. It was cheaper. And so his argument with utility companies is, if you reduce the cost of this to the customer, more people will use your product. You know, well, what's going to go first, cart or the horse, right? And so that becomes a discussion. So finally, with the Tennessee Valley Authority, at least in our region of the South, the decision was made that the government was going to get in the electric business. And when you go to work for the TVA, you know, they say that it's in Marble there, and I haven't been to their headquarters, that you're working for the people of the United States. And that's a whole different business. And so that's where they started. They generated the electricity with dams. And the TVA didn't have to ask permission. TVA just looked at the river. They were there to help control flooding. They were there to help bring the land back into productive utilization because a lot of it was being eroded away. And so the TVA went to work building dams, flooding communities, moving people off their land. They bought it, but they moved people off their land. Anybody from Henderson County knows that some people have never forgiven Big Bear for building the BRWDA lakes over there. It's a controversial thing. You couldn't do it today. You couldn't do it today. TVA would live long enough to see the snail darter put a stop to one of their projects, right? That's a different world, okay? But that's what happened, and so we got generation of electricity. Now here's the interesting thing. Tennessee Valley Authority expected those dams to generate all the power that Tennessee Valley would ever need. People didn't use electricity. TVA in the early days would carry out lamps and stuff to plug them in to show people, say, hey, this is what you can do with this stuff. Because they tended to use the electricity for their, you know, have a grinder where they could sharpen blades for their farm operations and other things, make sure their plows stayed sharp, that kind of stuff. It was a practical usage of electricity. It was not, you know, so TVA starts giving away lamps. And then they'll start selling appliances and everything else, try to help people. Plug this stuff in. You got this stuff, let's use it. But the dams were going to generate all the power that anybody was going to need in the Tennessee Valley. And then we got involved in this thing called World War II. We're not going to get in that war until December of 1941. Germany's been in that thing and preparing for it for years, except the Japanese and Italians, but particularly Germany, because they had a scientific, like they're developing all these rockets. You know, they're working on nuclear stuff, right? All this stuff's going on. We go from a standing start, December 7th or December the 8th, 1941, after Pearl Harbor, and we get ticked off. We've been sucker punched. We jump into that war. And from a standing start, nothing, army, okay? the middle of 1945, we got atomic weapons. You can think about that. The planes that were flying in World War I, those multi-wing biplanes, right, whatever they're called, you know, those of you that fly. That's where we ended World War I, 1918. 1939, Germany attacked Poland and all that stuff. They got the military, they got this stuff going on. We're not even in that game. We don't get in that game until December 41. And then what happens? Like I said, we got an atomic bomb in less than 4 years. Less than 4 years, standing start. What's gonna make that happen? One thing is Oak Ridge, Tennessee. The story that Lamar Alexander tells about Katie McKellar is he was head of the Senate Budget Committee, and our airport's named there. Said the president called him one day and said, I need you to hide $1 billion so we can win this war. Senator McKellar supposedly said, well, we're in Tennessee, you want to hide that $1 billion. Well, they decided to hide it in East Tennessee and build Oak Ridge from a standing start. But here's an ad that was running with the Jackson Electric Farm right during World War II. It says, conserve electricity for what reason? National defense. Shows this plane. And what it was, the government was making a big push for aluminum. And what was it going to take to generate that? Electricity. So they're asking people to save electricity at home so that TVA could generate electricity to make aluminum for the war effort. All right? But what happens to us? Well, because of war, Tennessee Valley Authority gets into steam, coal-fired production of electricity. Ain't got time to wait on anything. Can't build any more dams, right? We got to up the game. So they jumped into coal-fired generation. Steam, New Johnsonville. All these things start cropping up all across, okay? And the driver in that was national defense. And so what happens to us after World War II? We come back to World War II, and for the first time in our life, we got money. Right? We got Elvis on the radio. Mama's getting a vacuum cleaner. Can you believe it? I'll go sleep. Well, Mom, I'm going to take the carpets out and hang them out and beat them. Got a vacuum cleaner. It's gone from an icebox to a refrigerator. Lord help, some people even got a washer and dryer. Right? Next big thing's going to happen, and it happened in Jackson, Tennessee. Joe Exum, who was working with the Jackson Electric Department, it was at that time, said somebody in a crazy moment decided they were going to put air conditioning in their store. And you can shop in air-conditioned comfort. They not only put it in their store, they started bragging about it in the newspaper. He said, so the next thing you know, every time Dick and Harry's got a business in downtown Jackson, start trying to figure out a way to air condition their building. And so Joe said, we have more electric lines running around Jackson, Tennessee than you can imagine. And so Joe Exum, when he was with the Jackson Electric Department, as a young man, started designing the underground infrastructure that we're still using today to cut down on the light poles that were going up in Jackson, Tennessee. Well, why did that happen? Well, it happened because of all kinds of other factors out there. And that's what drove the development of electricity. Same thing with gas, appliances and everything else. But what happened with West Tennessee Power and Light? West Tennessee Power and Light was forced by the United States government to sell its electric assets to the city of Jackson. Because this is going to be public power, not private power. And public power is not going to feed private companies. So we got electric cooperatives that still exist. We got municipal systems, such as ours. And it all became because of the TVA. So today, in a single day, the Jackson Energy Authority will deliver 12 million gallons of clean water. We will transfer the Forked Hill River 12 million gallons of clean, safe water from what had been sewage and water runoff out of your sinks. We'll distribute 5 million kilowatts of electricity. On a peak day, we'll distribute up to 60 million cubic feet of natural gas through nearly 700 miles of power lines, 700 miles of natural gas pipe, not counting our propane customers, 800 miles of water line, over 700 miles of sewer. The fire hydrant system will provide water at 65 pounds per square inch of pressure to fight fires in any location in the city because there's a fire hydrant every 500 feet. There's no water meter on that thing. It's there. We can have all the fire trucks in the world, if you don't have water, you can't do it. We take all of that for granted. We take it all for granted. I do a presentation, they ask me, we got a food pantry? Well, of course. You store a lot of water? No. Well, you go without food for a few days, you can't live without water very long at all. Why are we not storing water? Because we assume it's gonna be there. So what's happened, we've seen electricity, when they got electricity in Jackson, people there in December. I don't know what the temperature was like on December 21st, but it may not have been the best of days. They're there to see this, and they cheer and applaud because they had seen the benefit of that. Well, that's all changed today, and we take it for granted. We go through an outage, a pretty extensive outage the other day, as many of you know. Some of it lasted for hours. When you break it, when you get straight line winds, a tornado goes through a specific area, it may tear things up for a mile or two wide, but it's a defined area. Straight line winds, 60 miles an hour, destroys stuff all over the city at the same time. Knocks down trees, power lines, everything, and there's no quick way to reset a power line. Somebody said, my power's been out for 3 hours, that's way too long.
Alice is out 52 hours.
Yeah, 52 hours. And she's on Southwest. But in the defense of Southwest, they got a lot of gaps between a lot of their houses out there. Yeah, I was up in Henry County a couple days later, and they were still running trucks and everything out there. Okay. Does that make sense as far as electricity goes? What happened with electricity and gas? It's a multiplicity of things. But the companies just describe themselves as functioning. One thing that's interesting, let me find this, because I did have this detail here. With West Tennessee Power and Light was forced to sell its electric system to the city of Jackson. The Securities and Exchange Commission did a report in 1942 that between March of 1925 and June of 1928, the National Power and Light Company acquired at a recorded price of $2.8 million the securities of Jackson Railway and Light Company, the Citizens Gas Light Company, and certain electric and water properties in 5 communities adjacent to Jackson, Tennessee. So they were putting together a conglomerate, which they did. So West Tennessee Power and Light sold along Citizens Gas Light Company to this national company. But then in January of 1939, West Tennessee Power and Light sold all of its electric properties to the Tennessee Valley Authority and to various municipalities such as Jackson. And shortly thereafter, it also disposed of its street railways, its streetcars, its ice and water properties. Because ice plants were a big, big thing in those days. You don't know what's going on. You hang around the coffee shop or hang around the ice plant. Because everybody's going to be at the ice plant at some point or another, right? So West Tennessee, what had been West Tennessee Power and Light, was left operating the facilities for the distribution of natural gas in Jackson and in Brownsville, Covington, Humboldt, Henning, and Ridley in the 1940s. That had a population of 45,000 people, and they had 5,915 customers. Of course, a customer is a house. There could be 10 people living in the house. And so you see that. I also found it interesting that these were the markets they were after in West Tennessee, including Henning and Ridley. Come out of World War II, places like Wildersville, Bible, were still thriving, growing places. And Wildersville doesn't exist. I don't think there's anything left there. Tiny, anything, I don't know. And so it's amazing how it's happened in just a short amount of time. Well, let's go back and pick up one other aspect of this story. That's water and sewer. Jackson Water Works was established in 1884, owned and operated by the city. It's going to be one of the city's greatest assets, furnishing abundant water from 14 artesian wells, 45 miles of street mains to all parts of the city, and 300 fire hydrants. Okay? Ever ready with the aid of the gallon pumps and the loyal and efficient corps of employees to protect the city from conflagration, etc. The lighting of our city streets is done by the waterworks. It's 1960. Current is generated at the pumping plant for the lamps, lighting practically the 15 miles of streets without any expense to the taxpayer. You generated power independently. So the water system is generating the electricity for the city. Interesting. Here's an article out of the Jackson Daily Whig, March 28, 1900. One of the busiest spots, this is 1900. All right, so we're dropping back just a bit. One of the busiest spots in town is at the southwest corner of Market, which is now Highland. Market Street. Market and Lafayette, so Highland and Lafayette downtown. So it's either there where the Merrill Lynch building was, the law offices are, or over there where NBC 39 is now. Carter Furniture was there at one time, whatever. You know what area we're talking about. But this building at the corner of Market and Lafayette, or the big bank building was there as well. Eventually. But the Continental Hotel building is being remodeled, is being modernized and transformed into a thoroughly up-to-date dry goods store and office building. As is well known, Mr. W.C. Wilkinson, the enterprising racket store man, has rented the property, and in a few days he'll be ready to move into it. The first floor is divided into large double storerooms with plate glass, projecting show windows. Mr. Wilkinson will run his own electric light plant. Mr. Wilkinson will run his own electric light plant in the basement with a 15 horsepower engine, driving double dynamos, one for lighting the building throughout, and the other for running the splendid electric passenger elevator, which will carry passengers from the basement to every floor in the building. Every room will also be heated from the large heater in the basement. The rooms on the second and third floors have been thoroughly overhauled, handsomely painted, skylights put in, and in every way fitted up for offices. The halls will be carpeted with linoleum, and at the foot of the broad airway leading into the first floor will be the tiling and the name of Mr. Wilkinson at the entrance. To put it concisely, when the building is completed, which will be in the next 2 weeks, Jackson will have a complete city business and office building with all the latest and most approved appliances and conveniences. This is 1900. Who's generating the electricity? He is. In his own building. All right? That's before we get to the TVA. That's before we get to all this other stuff. So he's got a building. He fixes it up. He takes care of it all. He's gonna heat it, light it, and everything. That's 1900. That world's gonna go away. It's gonna go away pretty quickly. Well, let's go back and pick up this sewer business for just a second. The challenge with the sewer business, the water business people thought of it well, because we had a fire department in 1882. Jackson organized his fire department in 1882. Well, those were pumpers, horses, and they had cisterns where they gathered all the water and captured the water, and so you got all the water in. Well, when you got a fire department, they could sure use a water supply, and so that became the one of the stimuluses to get in the water business, the city of Jackson. That and safety and everything else. Sewer is a different deal. This is from the West Tennessee Whig in February 16th of 1887. Whig had been encouraging this since 1885. But a large and representative mass meeting of the citizens of Jackson was gathered at the courthouse last Saturday night. This is in February. Not an ideal time to be out. But it's a large and mass. So the citizens of Jackson, the courthouse last Saturday night, to hear the call of the board of the mayor and aldermen to pursue allowing the city of Jackson to raise $100,000 in bonds for internal improvements. Mayor J.H. Hurst called the meeting to order, and then Mr. Brooks was elected chair and the secretary. And so they're going to pitch the idea that we needed some improvements in this city. They're going to want to pave streets, they want to expand the water system, and they want to get a sewage system built. And this breakdown of how much it's going to cost. The city charter had set a limit on how much indebtedness the city could carry. And so if you're going to change that, it's going to take some action to make that happen. We have to change the city's charter to allow that much more debt. Dr. B.R. Harris was called on and said although he had not studied the question, he opposed the changing of the charter for the issuance of any more bonds. He said the charter was the only safeguard and should not be changed. He did not think the city was able to have paved streets. He also said the deaths were 30 less last year than the year before, so we didn't need a sewer system either. We don't have enough people dying. Of course, what you're concerned about is if we get into debt, somebody got to pay that back, right? Well, he didn't think that should happen. Well, at the end of the meeting, they go through all of this. They finally said, we're gonna fund the present unfunded interest bearing debt on the city. They were gonna borrow money at a lower interest rate. That was gonna save them some money on what they were going to pay back, all right? They were gonna build a standpipe for the water works so they could capture more water and maintain the pressure. And they were going to build a system of sewage for the city. However, provided the bonds, will not be issued until certain things were met, and it was gonna be presented to the people for a vote. So we're gonna leave it up to the folks. Well, it's gonna take Jackson until the late 1880s, and then the early 1890s, to finally decide we need a sewer system here. Okay. That became the toughest sell, and it is today. Do a quick rundown before we go from there. TVA changes the value as far as electricity. Gas becomes a private company that tries to survive in competition with electricity. And those stories, and Jim Farrell knows those well, those stories are legendary. If you open a cafe or something, you didn't put in gas to cook on, gas guy's not gonna eat there. Right? They're in a competitive business. Using electricity, not gas. They're not gonna support that. What happens in 1959? What happens in 1959 is that Jackson, Tennessee combines the water system of the city, the electric system that's owned by the city, and operated by the city. They buy the gas company. Gas company wanted to sell. And there's some great photos of the gas campaigns that they paint up trucks and everything else about gas and gas appliances and everything else. At one time, Jim, I think they sold gas appliances, right? I think the gas department did. You can have gas hot water heaters and gas gas washers and dryers, all that kind of, they're still made. We just don't buy them. We use gas for heating and for logs, for cooking. But 1959, and that's detailed in this book here. And it was a difficult decision to make in one sense because it was going to combine competing companies. And how do you take, the gas company had its own way of doing business. It was a private company, had different benefit package than the city had and everything. He had to, Bruce Bynum, God love him, got the job as being the head of the board for the new Jackson Utility Division. He had to give up his seat on the city commission when we had 3. That's back when Buddy paid in and other people were on the city commission. But he had to give up his seat. He also had a salary cap, which capped everybody that worked for the utility company. They were finally gonna break that away and appoint a private board, not a private board, but a separate board from the city to run the utility company. The other thing that was gonna happen, the sewage. Let me go back up there, see. I think it talks about one more. No. Shut this down. Jackson had a great topography because we're pretty flat. And so, sewage, it says that sewage, our city particularly fortunate in its location. The drainage is excellent. There are no large, flat sections. Nature has provided 3 large channels through the city to carry away all the surface water, and a flowing river carries off all the sewage from the 22 miles of sewage main that the city has laid. All right. Where's this sewage going? Corridor River, right? It's going wrong. So the whole idea of the sewage system is not to treat all this, just to get it out of town.
Right.
Let's just get it out of town. And then, of course, what happens in the middle of the 1960s, we started getting Clean Water and Clean Air Act. And so suddenly, the Jackson Utility Division has to come up with a few $1 million to start treating sewage. They weren't really excited about that. Because people may be willing to pay for gas, and they may be willing to pay for water. They're not really interested in paying to get sewage. how you gonna put a meter on that, right? You can't. How much flushing are you doing? How many baths are you taking? All that other stuff. And so what happens with all that is that we start connecting that to the amount of water that you use. It becomes a way to build for water treatment. But water treatment becomes a very, very important thing because the water that's discharged into the Forked River you can drink. You know, put up aquariums and fish live in. That's a totally different world. But that came along in the 1960s. Now, when I talk to young people, that seems like forever ago anyway. Start talking to us in 1960s. Oh my God. All those fresh Tennessee River catfish I ate out of porcelain. I mean, you think about it, every city from Chattanooga to Huntsville, Alabama, everybody's by the river. Where's the sewage going? Going to the river, going to the Tennessee River. Going to the Tennessee River, and it's flowing north. Time it gets to Decatur County, it's pretty right. Right? So we're out there, we're out there fishing, bring home a string of fish. It's like, well, no wonder they grow big here. And whole different world, is it not? Whole different world. There's one other step that's going to come for the Jackson utility company. Totally unexpected. That was the TVA. That was everything else that happened in that. In the late 1990s, we had an industrial prospect with whom our people were visiting. And Jackson, Tennessee was skilled at recruiting industry. We went through a decade there. We Procter & Gamble, everybody else, we landed people right and left in this town. Had an industrial prospect, in the midst of all these questions, asked about data plans for Jackson, Tennessee. Now, our people, to be honest with you, didn't know what they were talking about. They were used to labor, workforce questions, transportation access, you have rail service. How much sewage discharge can y'all handle? Right, how much gas can we get, at what rate? What do you mean data plan? So they called a break. So what do these people want to know? So what do they want to know about broadband? Well, to be honest, our folks really never heard of it much. So they started working. Called AT&T, called people in the communications business, cable television, everything, and say, what about this broadband? What are we going to do? We got an industrial prospect asking us. John Williams said, I had a real simple approach to this business. If I got somebody wanting to invest millions of dollars in Jackson, the answer is yes. Then we'll figure out later on how we're going to make that happen, but the answer is yes. Well, those companies had no plans to build anything here. First of all, Jackson's a small city. Small city. You are not going to need it anytime soon. If you ever need it, we'll build it. We'll build whatever the market demands. Right? That's what they say. Is that true? No. They got here, Jim, 2018, maybe, and didn't run wire, didn't run fiber everywhere in this city. Pick the hot spots, upper income, industry, business. John Williams made the decision that the Jackson Utility Division was going to get in the broadband business. Why? Because he became convinced we had to have it. If we were going to survive as a city, be competitive. We got a medical complex that's growing into a medical center. They do data transfers of files and x-rays, demanding it. So he felt like we were going to have to. Well, the only problem is we didn't have any authority to do that. So he had to go to the mayor and tell the mayor that we're going to take your utility company away from you. We're going to make it independent. We're going to go to the state of Tennessee and get organized as an energy authority, which then means you have to go to Nashville and politic and get that done. And there are a few people not wanting you to get into it. Telephone company, cable companies. So you're fixing to get sued for the next 4 or 5 years. But in 2004, 2003 going into 2004, the Jackson Energy Authority was actually formed in 2001. Had to go through some lawsuits. Started actually the building and moving into broadband business in 2004. 2009, Jackson's son, Ned Hunter, does a front page story, no profit yet for the telecom division, in which it was said that it, no matter if you had copper wire or fiber or whatever, it was all the same thing. Because what were we doing in 2009? Getting emails. Right, getting emails. Today, Absolutely essential. There was in 2004, less than 100,000 homes in this country that were passed by fiber. In 2004, when Jackson started. Jackson was gonna add 30,000 homes to that figure. By 2009, it's 15 million. And now, it's everywhere. Federal government's involved in helping fund it through the USDA and everything else because you gotta have it. Jackson, Tennessee was the first fiber to the home city in this state. And in a day when there were only 100,000 homes in America passed by fiber, Jackson, Tennessee added 30,000 to that figure. Okay. And that's borrowed $60 million in revenue bonds. Have no customers, because when you build, how many customers you got day one? None. $10 million line of credit from the bank to launch. Jim, I think, what, 3 payments away from having it fully paid off. And $7 million out of that revenue went into making this system point-to-point gig infrastructure. To the point, once you have the point-to-point infrastructure there, we already had the fiber. Once you have the point-to-point infrastructure there, how many gig do you want? You want 2 gig, 5 gig, 10 gig? What do you want? Capacity's there. It's an amazing thing. It's a reflection, just like JUD. You go to Nashville, Tennessee today, Nashville Electric's totally separate from Nashville Gas. Water and wastewater and water come through other departments. When they got somebody want to do business in Nashville, they got to meet with a half dozen folks. Half dozen, that's Nashville. Okay. You come to Jackson, Tennessee, until a few weeks ago, Mr. Farrell walked in with his folks, and they can make commitments to do things. Toyota Bodine, came in here a few years ago. This man from Japan said he didn't like that overhead line going across that property out. And John Williams said, don't worry about that, the line's gone. Our people out there with him said, John, that's not our line. That's a TVA line. He said, it's gone. Now, you know, in his mind it was. The man from Japan left, believe me, that line's not there today. Toyota Bodine is, or Bodine now, or whatever, Toyota, whatever it is now, I think it's dropped Bodine. The city's benefited from its utility structure, but it was not planned. Like so many things in this life, right? It was not planned. It happened. But it happened because the right people were leading, right forces out there that changed everything. Just like with the TVA, nobody planned the TVA. 10 years before, nobody was talking about the TVA. TVA didn't come until 1933, and like I said to young people, that's ancient history. To me, that's not that many years before I was born, right? And we take it for granted, but it's a blessed thing. And Jackson, Tennessee, I think, as far as its utility history, has a blessed history. People doing the right things at the right times to benefit us all. I appreciate you letting me come and share this.